what if standard physics has basically been faking the math for the last 70 years?
That is quite the opening question.
Right. I mean, think about it. What if the Big Bang never actually happened? And, those little electrons we all learn about in high school chemistry, what if they don't actually exist as tiny orbiting particles?
It sounds like heresy to a traditional physicist,
It
honestly.
really does.
Okay.
But today, we are taking a deep dive into a document that essentially claims modern physics is just this giant, incredibly expensive game of empirical whack-a-mole.
Whack-a-mole is a pretty accurate way to describe the frustration, yeah.
Because we measure something in a particle accelerator, right? And we realize our equations don't predict it at all.
Yes, exactly.
So we just invent a mathematical fudge factor to force the equation to match the observation. And we've just been doing this for decades.
It's a profound headache within the scientific community. I mean, even if it isn't always discussed publicly, we all know it's happening.
Right.
We have built this extraordinarily complex mathematical scaffolding in modern physics. But so much of it relies on what we call fitted parameters.
Fitted params.
Yeah, we observe a phenomenon, and when the foundational theory can't explain it, we just insert a constant into the equation purely to make the math work out.
Just to make the answer right.
Exactly. It is post hoc theoretical justification.
So that brings us to our sources for today. We are diving deep into a 2025 theoretical physics paper by George James Dukas.
A massively ambitious paper.
Yeah, it's titled Transdimensional Unified Field Theory V10, or TBUFT for short.
TDUFT, right.
And our mission for this deep dive is to explore a radically different way of understanding the universe, from like the very center of an atom all the way to the edge of the cosmos.
And we are not asking you to just abandon everything you know blindly, but we do want to explore the premise of this dense paper.
Right. The premise is wild. I mean, imagine if the entire universe wasn't just a random collection of accidents and, well, fitted parameters.
What if it wasn't a bunch of chaotic quantum dice being rolled over and over again?
Yeah. What if, instead, the entire universe was a single, inevitable geometric shape, unfolding from literally one simple math equation?
The ambition of this theory, it really cannot be overstated. I mean, it attempts to replace the most fundamental tenets of modern physical science.
Which is huge.
It targets the standard quantum model, the metric expansion of the universe, the very nature of subatomic particles. And it tries to do all of this using pure, parameter-free geometry.
Parameter-free, so no fudge factors.
None. The author is basically demanding that we abandon fitted constants and look at raw mathematical necessity as the sole architect of reality.
Okay, so to understand why this paper is so revolutionary and why it's actively trying to rewrite the textbooks, we first have to look at the massive problem in physics that it's trying to solve.
Which brings us to magic numbers.
Right, the magic numbers. Now, before I read this source material, I have to say, if you had told me physicists actually use the term magic, I would have assumed you were messing with me.
It does sound a bit mystical, but it's a real formal term.
I mean, it is.
It dates back to the mid-20th century. Around 1949, physicists, most notably Maria Goeppert-Mayer, made this foundational observation about atomic nuclei.
A nucleus being, the dense center of an atom made of protons and neutrons.
Exactly. So Goeppert-Mayer and her colleagues noticed that atomic nuclei are exceptionally, undeniably stable when they contain certain specific quantities of those protons or neutrons.
And those specific quantities are the magic numbers.
Yes.
So the numbers are 2, 8, 20, 28, 50, 82, and 126.
Those are the ones.
And whenever an element has one of those numbers of protons or neutrons or both, it is just practically indestructible compared to other elements. Like helium has 2 protons, oxygen has 8, calcium has 20.
They are the absolute sturdy bricks of the universe.
They just don't break apart easily. They don't decay rapidly. They just kind of sit there holding reality together.
They really form the backbone of all observable matter. If you look at the cosmic abundance of elements, the universe heavily favors these magic-numbered nuclei.
But there's a mystery here, right?
Yes, the mystery lies in the theoretical models. Standard physics treats these magic numbers purely as empirical observations.
Meaning we only know they exist because we can physically see them.
Right. We measure them in mass spectrometers and particle accelerators. We see the stability with our own eyes, essentially.
Right.
But when physicists originally tried to write an equation to predict why an atom with 8 protons is more stable than an atom with 7 or 9, the math failed.
And this is where the fudge factor comes back in.
Precisely. To make the theoretical math actually predict these highly stable states, physicists had to introduce a concept called spin-orbit coupling.
Okay.
And more importantly, they had to introduce a spin-orbit coupling parameter.
A parameter, meaning they literally had to invent a specific arbitrary number, inject it into the equation, just to make the equation spit out the 2, 8, and 20 that they already knew they needed to find.
Yes, it's frustrating.
I have to admit, reading that in the source material, it felt a bit like discovering a cheat code.
How do you mean?
It's like knowing the answer to a math problem on a test is 8, but your work only gets you to a 5. So you just write in a +3 rule and really hope the teacher doesn't ask where it came from.
That test analogy is highly illustrative of the frustration theoretical physicists face every day.
I can imagine.
The standard nuclear shell model requires dozens of these independently specified parameters. Different parameters for different masses, different interactions.
So they're just swapping out the +3 for a +7 whenever they need to.
Essentially, yes. The question of why the universe prefers 2, 8, or 20 from a purely fundamental causal standpoint remains an open mystery in standard physics.
We know that it happens, but the why is totally obscured by this web of fitted data.
Exactly. And this is exactly where TDUFT throws down the gauntlet.
Yeah, the text introduces an alternative that seems almost, absurd in its simplicity.
It really is simple.
Instead of 19 fitted parameters, instead of inventing rules to reach those specific stable states, this theory claims to derive the exact magic numbers from a single foundational quadratic equation.
Just one equation.
And the equation is literally just x squared minus x minus 1 equals 0.
A profoundly simple equation, yes, but one with massive historical and mathematical weight.
Okay, unpack that for us.
Well, that specific quadratic equation has 2 roots. The positive root is the golden ratio,
Right.
denoted by the Greek letter phi, which is approximately 1.618.
Okay.
And the negative root is its conjugate, ci, which is approximately negative 0.618.
The golden ratio. I mean, anyone who has taken an art history class or, watched a nature documentary has encountered this.
It's everywhere.
It's that mathematical proportion we see in the spiral of a nautilus shell, the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower.
Yes.
Even the proportions of classical Greek architecture like the Parthenon. It's famous for being aesthetically pleasing.
But the author of TDUFT argues that the presence of the golden ratio in nature is not merely an aesthetic coincidence or just some biological quirk of efficiency.
Right.
He posits that phi and psi are the fundamental operators of physical reality itself.
The fundamental operator.
Yes.
Yeah.
In this theoretical framework, the positive root, phi, represents expansion. It represents velocity and structure. It is the geometric builder.
Okay.
While the negative root, psi, represents contraction, time, and entropy, it acts as the tension bearer, pulling against the expansion.
Okay, I need to stop you there for a second.
Okay.
Because when I first read this part, my internal skeptic alarms were absolutely blaring.
That's completely fair.
Deriving the physical universe from a single algebra equation sounds a bit like trying to build a skyscraper with a single toothpick.
I understand the skepticism.
Like, is the author just taking the golden ratio, which is admittedly a cool, famous math trick, and forcing it onto the atomic nucleus to see if it sticks?
Right, like trying to force a pattern.
Yeah. It feels borderline like numerology, like looking for patterns where none actually exists.
And that skepticism is exactly the lens through which any physicist would view this claim initially.
So how does the paper defend it?
Well, the text anticipates this pushback and goes to great lengths to provide a rigorous topological grounding. It removes the golden ratio from the realm of aesthetics and places it firmly in the realm of 3D geometry.
Okay.
The theory maps the first 5 magic numbers, 2, 8, 20, 28, and 50, exactly to the 5 Platonic solids.
The Platonic solids.
Yeah.
Okay, let's refresh everyone's memory on those really quick.
Sure.
These are the unique 3D shapes where every single face is a regular polygon of the exact same size and shape, right?
Right.
And the same number of faces meet at each vertex.
Exactly.
And there are only 5 possible shapes in the universe that meet this criteria. You have the tetrahedron, which is like a 4-sided pyramid.
Right.
The octahedron, which looks like 2 pyramids stuck base to base. The icosahedrons, which is basically the 20-sided die from tabletop games.
Yes, the D20.
And then the cube and the dodecahedron.
Right. Those are the 5. Now, the author points out a universal law governing all of these shapes. Every single Platonic solid satisfies the Euler topological invariant.
The Euler topological invariant, what is the formula for that?
The formula is V minus E plus F equals 2.
V minus E plus F equals 2.
Yes. That means if you take the number of vertices, subtract the number of edges, and add the number of faces, the result for any closed 3D object will always be exactly 2.
Okay, wait, let me do the math in my head for a cube really quick to make sure I get it.
Go for it.
So a cube has 8 corners, or vertices. It has 12 edges and 6 flat faces.
Correct.
So 8 minus 12 is -4. Add the 6 faces, and yeah, you get 2.
It works.
It works for every closed 3-dimensional polyhedron. And
Yeah.
here's where it connects. TDUFT maps the first magic number 2 to the fundamental structure of the tetrahedron.
Okay.
The second magic number 8 maps to the faces of the octahedron. The third, 20, maps perfectly to the 20 faces of the icosahedron.
Oh, wow. Okay. The fourth, 28, relates to a specific combination within the cubic lattice. And the fifth, 50, maps to the vertices and edges of the dodecahedron.
Okay, I have to admit, mapping those numbers to shapes is a really neat trick. But why does it matter?
What do you mean?
Like, what is the actual physics connection between a geometric rule that equals 2 and the physical reality of an atom?
The connection lies in the dimensional origin of electromagnetic propagation.
That's a mouthful.
It is, but in the theory, this exact topological constant, the number 2, is what governs the dimensional step from a flat 2D plane to a 3D volume.
Oh, I see.
Think about it. A 2D plane is open. It has no interior, no exterior. To fold a plane into a closed 3D volume, it mathematically requires a topological constraint of 2.
And the text says this applies to light.
Yes, the author argues that light propagating from a 2D photon plane into 3D space uses this exact same geometric bridge.
Okay, so the magic numbers are not arbitrary quantities of protons.
Not at all.
They are the topological necessities for a 3D structure to close in on itself.
Exactly. So it's not numerology, it's structural architecture.
Right, like if you want to build a stable 3D object in space, you literally have no other choice but to use these geometric constraints.
The atomic nucleus is just following the only blueprints available to it in a 3D universe.
That is fascinating. The nucleus isn't somehow choosing to be stable at 8 or 20. It is geometrically forced into stability because it has completed a platonic shape in a higher dimensional lattice.
That is the core argument, yes.
Okay, let's transition to the mechanism of how this actually builds a physical atom that we can measure in a lab.
A very important next step.
Because, knowing the foundational equation is one thing, but atomic physics requires discrete, measurable states.
Right.
And this is where the text introduces what it calls the Fischl rule.
Yes. So the theory proposes that an atomic nucleus isn't just a randomly packed blob of protons and neutrons.
Like a bag of marbles.
Right, not a bag of marbles. It is built in strict sequential shells, which the text indexes with the letter K.
Okay, shell K.
Each shell K contains a primary structural particle placed at a very specific geometric position on a dimensional lattice.
And how is that position determined?
By a simple power function. It's phi raised to the power of 2k minus 1.
Let me make sure I'm following. So for the very first shell 1, K equals 1.
Yes.
So the formula is 2 times 1 minus 1, which is 1. So the position is just phi to the power of 1.
Correct.
And for shell 2, it's 2 times 2 minus 1, which is 3. So the position is phi to the power of 3.
Exactly. It's an exponential outward stepping.
That exponential stepping dictates the physical architecture, though.
It does. But here is the critical innovation of the paper, the part that completely breaks away from the standard model.
Ole, Ani.
In standard particle physics, a particle is generally treated as a singular, unified entity with intrinsic properties, right?
A solid thing, yeah.
In TDUFT, every particle in these shells is not a solid, uniform thing. It is mathematically defined as a mix of two normalized fractions.
The Eck and Skek fractions. This part of the source material was fascinating, but honestly, it was incredibly dense.
Let's break it down.
Please.
The Eck fraction represents the velocity or the expansional state of the shell.
Yeah.
The Skek fraction represents the entropy or the contractional state. And because they are normalized conjugates derived from that original quadratic equation, Eck plus Skek must always equal exactly 1.
Always 1. So there are no missing pieces,
Yeah.
no leftovers.
Exactly 1. Now let's look at how this plays out across the elements of the periodic table.
Okay, let's go.
In shell 1, which mathematically corresponds to the helium-4 nucleus, the equations dictate that the state is heavily velocity dominant.
Okay, so high velocity.
Yes. Specifically, the math outputs 27.6% velocity and 72.4% entropy.
And a high velocity fraction means the shell is energetic, right?
Yeah.
It's dynamic. It's actively holding its structure together.
Yes.
Which perfectly aligns with reality because helium is incredibly stable, it's very light, and highly inert. It refuses to react with other elements because its geometric structure is so tight.
The geometric tension is tightly bound. But watch what happens to the math as you move outward to heavier nuclei.
Okay.
By shell 3, which corresponds to calcium-40, the state becomes massively entropy-dominated.
The entropy takes over.
Yes. The math shows the velocity fraction drops to only 5.3%, while the entropy fraction skyrockets to 94.7%.
Okay, I kept trying to visualize this while I was reading, and an analogy came to mind. Tell me if this works.
I'd love to hear it.
It feels like a massive mixing board in a recording studio.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, you have two tracks for the universe,
Hmm.
a velocity track and an entropy track. As you slide the master fader up to build heavier and heavier elements, the velocity track naturally fades out and the entropy track fades in.
That mixing board analogy perfectly captures the inverse relationship. And more importantly, it perfectly matches the observed reality of heavy elements.
How so?
Well, in standard physics, as elements get heavier as you pack more and more protons and neutrons into the nucleus, they become incredibly complex. They become bloated, distributed, and eventually they become unstable and radioactive.
Right, uranium and plutonium and all that.
Exactly. The standard model has to introduce highly complex interaction terms like weak force modifications just to explain why heavy elements eventually fall apart.
But TDUFT doesn't need new forces to explain radioactivity.
Not at all. TBUFT states that nuclear instability is just the inevitable mathematical result of the entropy track fading in.
Wow.
As the shell number K increases, the velocity fraction approaches 0. The geometry simply loses the dynamic tension required to hold itself together, and entropy takes over.
So radioactivity is just the geometric lattice collapsing under its own mathematical weight.
That's exactly it.
Okay, a theoretical mixing board is a beautiful concept. But, a theory that attempts to rewrite a century of physics is just philosophy unless it can make testable numerical predictions.
Physics absolutely demands receipts.
Physics demands receipts. And the source material highlights what the author calls a massive smoking gun regarding binding energy.
Yes, binding energy.
Can you explain that?
Well, the binding energy of a nucleus is one of the most critical measurements in all of physics. It is the exact amount of energy required to completely disassemble a nucleus into its separate protons and neutrons.
It's the glue.
It is the glue. In standard physics, calculating this requires several empirical parameters specific to the nucleus being measured. You basically have to tweak the knobs based on what you are already looking at.
So how does TDUFT approach the glue?
It abandons the knobs entirely. TDUFT calculates the dimensionless binding energy ratio between oxygen-16 and helium-4 using purely the phi geometry and a single universal constant called epsilon Ntor.
Okay, I need to pause you on that constant. Epsilon Ntor.
Yes.
The value given in the text is 0.00207542. Where does that incredibly specific decimal come from?
A very valid question.
Because if it's just another fitted parameter that the author snuck in, then the whole theory falls apart.
The text is extremely explicit that this is not a fitted parameter.
Okay.
Epsilon Ntor is derived purely from the theoretical wave attenuation of the infinite lattice itself.
Meaning what exactly?
It is the mathematical cost of a wave propagating through this geometric structure, completely independent of whatever specific nucleus is being measured. It is as fundamental to this theory as pi is to a circle.
Okay, so taking the pure phi geometry and this universal wave attenuation constant, what does the math say the binding energy ratio of oxygen-16 to helium-4 should actually be?
The purely mathematical geometric prediction is 4.39.
4.39. And what is the real-world experimentally measured ratio from the particle labs?
The real-world measurement is 4.51.
Wow. That is a 2.6% deviation.
A 2.6% deviation achieved with 0 empirical tweaking.
That's insane.
No parameters were adjusted, no mass-specific fudge factors were applied. It is a genuine geometric prediction that lands within a tiny margin of error of observable reality.
That is staggering, truly. But it brings us to a conceptual hurdle in the paper.
Okay.
Because the theory accurately predicts these stable shells and the energy holding them together using fractions, right?
Yeah.
Fractions of velocity, fractions of entropy.
Yes.
But how do we get from abstract fractional math to discrete physical reality? A proton is a whole thing. You don't walk into a lab and find 72.4% of a proton. You have one proton or two protons.
This is where the paper moves from mechanics into profound mathematical philosophy. It requires a radical rethinking of a concept we all take completely for granted.
Which is?
The concept of zero.
Zero.
The text introduces what it calls the Eternum Nexus principle.
Right, the Eternum Nexus principle. Yeah. The central formula for this principle in the text is written out as structure represented by the number 1 interacting with 0, represented by the number 0 interacting with wave, represented by -1.
Yes.
And that whole equation equals physical reality.
To understand how this bridges fractions into solid reality, we have to look at the two interlocking mathematical systems the author describes. He calls them the additive ladder and the multiplicative ladder.
The two ladders, okay.
The additive system uses the linear equation, phi plus psi equals 1. This system provides the physical structure, the geometric position of the shell, and that rigid platonic solid topology we discussed earlier.
Okay, so it's the 3D scaffolding, the bones of the atom.
Yes, exactly. But then there's the multiplicative system, which is phi times psi equals -1.
Okay.
This system provides the wave propagation, the dynamic tension, that constant balancing act of the velocity and entropy fractions we just talked about.
So you have these two systems, the additive one and the multiplicative -1, overlapping to create physical space.
Right.
But if they overlap, wouldn't there be a massive fractional mismatch?
How do you mean?
Well, the golden ratio is an irrational number. It goes on forever.
Yeah.
1.6180339 and so on. If you are building a universe out of irrational numbers, how do you ever get a clean, whole number of protons?
That is the core issue.
Shouldn't reality be, I don't know, fuzzy at the edges?
In standard mathematics, 0 is nothing more than a void. It is a placeholder, a literal absence of value.
Right, like the Babylonians and Mayans invented it to make sure we knew the difference between 101 and 11.
Exactly. But in TDUFT, 0 is redefined as an active operator. The author calls it the primordial receptacle.
When I read that, it broke my brain a little bit. You're saying 0 isn't just nothing. It's like a cosmic shock absorber.
A cosmic shock absorber is an incredibly apt way to visualize it.
Really?
Yes. The text explicitly states that 0 functions as a geometric mirror and a balancing receptacle. When the infinitely long fractional geometric positions from the additive system are projected onto the wave system, there is inevitably a fractional mismatch.
Right, because of the irrational numbers.
Exactly. There is a messy, irrational remainder generated by the intersection of phi and psi. The 0 receptacle actively absorbs that fractional deficit.
It swallows the decimal.
It completely swallows the decimals. It absorbs the creation cost, essentially, the entropy signature of the intersection, and it leaves behind perfect, exact integers in the observable space with 0 remainder. This is the mechanism that explains why atoms have exactly 2, 8, or 20 nucleons. The structural 0 forces exact integer closure.
So the apparent variance, the irrational messiness of the underlying lattice.
It's all absorbed by the 0 operator before it ever becomes physical matter.
That is wild. It treats 0 as a verb, an action that the universe performs every single nanosecond to keep physical reality mathematically clean and whole.
It really is a profound shift in how we view the foundation of mathematics. It ensures that the magic numbers are absolute integer geometric necessities, not just lucky, whole number accidents of quantum probability.
Okay, so if the nucleus is governed by this incredibly strict integer-producing geometric lattice, what does that mean for the rest of the atom?
Moving outward.
Yeah, because the nucleus is unimaginably tiny. I mean, if an atom were the size of a football stadium, the nucleus would be a pea sitting on the 50-yard line.
A very accurate scale, yes.
The vast majority of an atom is the electron cloud, what we traditionally think of as just empty space. How do electrons, which seem so chaotic, fit into this rigid golden ratio structure?
The paper fundamentally restructures the entire architecture of the atom. It abandons the planetary model entirely.
The planetary model, meaning a dense nucleus surrounded by point particles orbiting in empty space.
Right, that's out. Instead, it defines the atom as a continuous, three-tiered phi-shell hierarchy. The geometry doesn't stop at the edge of the nucleus. It extends outward into infinity.
Let's walk through these 3 tiers because this really changes how we visualize the stuff we interact with every day.
Tier 1 is the nuclear core. This corresponds to the innermost shells, K equals 1 through 7.
Okay.
This is the volumetric matter-dense region. It operates entirely in 3-dimensional space, which the text categorizes as dimensional level D3. This is where the protons and neutrons live, locked in their Platonic geometries.
Okay, so tier 1 is the solid P on the 50-yard line. What is tier 2?
Tier 2 is the electron architecture. These are shells 8 through 20. And the author describes this tier not as a place where particles orbit, but as a dimensional boundary.
A boundary between what?
It is the interface between D3, our three-dimensional volume, and D2, which is planar, two-dimensional electromagnetism.
Okay, and then what about the rest of the stadium? Tier 3.
Tier 3 is the quantum vacuum. This begins at shell 21 and extends outward to infinity. These are infinite, geometrically perfect shells that are completely empty.
Empty, like a void.
It's not a void of nothingness, as we usually think of empty space. It's an active lattice of geometric potential that simply lacks the velocity fraction required to manifest solid matter.
This connects directly to human experience in a way that I found really compelling in the text.
Oh, the feeling zone.
Yes, the text introduces the concept of the feeling zone.
Right.
Like we perceive a table as solid, right? And knock on wood, it feels hard. Standard physics says my hand doesn't pass through the table because the electrons in my hand magnetically repel the electrons in the table. But TDUFT frames solidity as a dimensional illusion.
It does. TDUFT argues that human perception is strictly confined to the D3 layer. We perceive atoms as solid simply because our physical biology, our neural processing, is tuned exclusively to the specific velocity and entropy balance of those inner shells.
The K equals 1 through 7 shells.
Exactly. We are D3 biological constructs interacting with D3 mathematical geometry.
So the rest of the atom, the electrons, the vast quantum vacuum, it's all physically there, it's highly structured, but it's just vibrating at a dimensional frequency we lack the hardware to touch.
Exactly. And this leads to perhaps the most controversial claim in the entire paper.
Which is saying something.
It's a massive reframing of quantum mechanics.
Okay, how so?
In standard quantum theory, electrons are point particles that exist in a cloud of probability. According to the Copenhagen interpretation, you can never know exactly where an electron is, only the statistical probability of finding it there.
Right, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. The famous Schrödinger's cat thought experiment, where the cat is both dead and alive until you open the box and force the probability wave to collapse.
Yes.
Quantum mechanics essentially rests on the idea that the universe at the smallest level is fundamentally uncertain and random.
But TDUFT forcefully rejects that fundamental randomness. It states that electrons are not point particles buzzing around a probability cloud. They are phi-shell torsion excitations.
Torsion excitations, like a localized twist in a piece of fabric?
Yes. Imagine that dimensional boundary we discussed in Tier 2, the interface between the 2D electromagnetic plane and the 3D volume.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
An electron is a discrete geometric twist right at that boundary. It has a specific, highly defined location on the phi lattice.
I have to ask the obvious question here.
Go ahead.
If electrons have a specific location, is Schrödinger's wave equation just wrong? Has the entire field of quantum mechanics been barking up the wrong tree for a century?
It's a fair question.
Because those equations built our modern world. Semiconductors, lasers, MRI machines, they all rely on quantum mechanics working.
The author is very careful with this distinction. TDUFT clarifies that Schrödinger's equations are not wrong. They are incredibly accurate, highly predictive mathematical tools, but they are strictly observational descriptions, not fundamental reality.
Wait, how can an equation be perfectly accurate but not describe reality?
Think about the act of measurement. The probabilistic nature of quantum mechanics, the apparent randomness, is an illusion caused by dimensional mismatch.
Dimensional mismatch.
It is an artifact of human researchers who exist in D3 space, trying to project a higher dimensional geometric twist the electron onto a lower dimensional measurement space.
Oh, I see. It's like trying to draw a 3D sphere on a flat 2D piece of paper.
Exactly.
You instantly lose information. You have to use shading and perspective, which are just artistic tricks, to represent the 3D object on the 2D plane.
That is an excellent way to visualize the problem. Quantum probability isn't fundamental randomness baked into the universe. It's a projection artifact.
It's the shading we use because we can't see the whole shape.
Yes. The electron occupies a definite mathematically rigid torsion state on the phi lattice. We just can't see the entire geometry from our restricted dimensional vantage point. So to our instruments, it looks like a smeared out probability cloud.
That is a staggering paradigm shift. If the universe isn't fundamentally random at the quantum level, if it's just hidden geometry.
It vindicates Albert Einstein's famous objection to quantum mechanics.
God does not play dice with the universe.
Exactly. When Einstein said that, he was arguing that there must be hidden variables we couldn't see. TDUFT claims to have found the hidden variable, the infinite phi geometry.
And speaking of infinite, if we follow this infinite hierarchy of empty shells outward, past the nucleus, past the electron twists, past the quantum vacuum of a single atom, we eventually reach the macroscopic scale, right?
Yes, we do.
The scale of planets, galaxies, and the entire universe. And here, TDUFT fundamentally rewrites cosmology and the origin of everything.
It is a logical necessity of the math. Remember that the Fish shell formula phi to the power of 2k minus 1 doesn't stop at the edge of the atom, it scales to infinity.
Right.
But as the shell number k approaches infinity, the math of those UC and SC fractions does something very specific. The velocity fraction, EC, exponentially drops to absolute 0,
Okay.
and the entropy fraction, SCUC, becomes exactly 1.
Total entropy.
Yeah.
Zero velocity. Zero structure holding itself together.
Yes. Now let's contrast this with standard cosmology. If we trace the current expansion of the universe backward in time, standard physics hits a brick wall called the singularity,
The Big Bang.
the Big Bang. It is a point of infinite density and infinite temperature where the mathematical equations of general relativity literally break down and output nonsense. It's a pathology in the theory.
Modern physics essentially throws its hands up and says, we can describe the universe a millisecond after the Big Bang, but at absolute time zero, our math stops working.
Exactly. But in the TDUFT framework, the singularity is not a highly compressed, infinitely dense dot.
What is it then?
The singularity is simply the pure entropy state of the Fish shell recursion. It is the mathematical limit where k approaches infinity.
Okay, pure entropy.
It is a state of maximal structural potential with 0 velocity. In this state, the infinite lattice of fish shells exists as a geometric scaffolding, but they are completely empty of matter.
So instead of the universe starting as a dot that suddenly exploded and created space, it's more like a giant, infinite, entirely empty geometric scaffolding that is sequentially, shell by shell, filling up with matter.
Yes. Time itself begins as these empty shells start filling with the velocity fraction. The expansion of the universe isn't a physical stretching of the fabric of space.
Wait, hold on. Standard cosmology relies heavily on the metric expansion of space. We use the Friedmann equations to describe it.
We do.
And more recently, we invented dark energy, another fudge factor to explain why that expansion seems to be accelerating.
TDUFT replaces the standard metric expansion of the universe entirely. It does away with the need for dark energy, and it discards the cosmological constant.
Completely discards them.
Yes. Instead, it replaces those concepts with a discrete phi shell filling rate.
So what happens to the Hubble parameter, then? When astronomers look through telescopes and measure redshifted galaxies moving away from us, they calculate the Hubble constant to prove the universe is expanding. If space isn't stretching, what are they measuring?
The Hubble parameter in TDUFT doesn't measure the stretching of space. It simply encodes the current temporal rate at which these pre-existing geometric shells are filling up with matter.
So the universe isn't getting physically bigger.
Right. The universe isn't expanding outward in physical size. The wave of creation is moving outward through an already infinite geometric lattice. There was no Big Bang explosion. There is only geometric emergence.
It's like watching a massive sports stadium fill up with people before a game.
A great analogy, yes.
The stadium is already there. The concrete seats are the empty lattice. The Big Bang model assumes the stadium itself is growing larger and stretching the people apart. But TDUFT says the stadium has always been infinite, and we're just watching the wave of spectators fill the seats row by row.
The stadium analogy is incredibly precise. And the beauty of this framework is that because the stadium filling is driven by the exact same quadratic equation that builds the atomic nucleus, it perfectly unifies cosmology and quantum physics.
Wow, it really does.
The fundamental problem in modern physics is that general relativity, the big stuff, and quantum mechanics, the small stuff, refuse to work together. TDUFT says they are the exact same math.
The equation that dictates the size of a microscopic helium nucleus is the exact same equation dictating the emergence of the entire cosmos.
Yes.
Okay, this is undeniably a beautiful theory. It's elegant, but as we established earlier, elegance doesn't win Nobel Prizes. Predictive power does.
Indeed.
A theory is only as good as the experimental data it can accurately forecast. Does this theory actually have proof?
It does. Appendix K of the paper details what the author considers the ultimate undeniable validation of the theory. It involves a very specific isotope, molybdenum-84.
Molybdenum-84, so that's an atom with 42 protons and 42 neutrons.
Correct. In the standard model of nuclear physics, when a nucleus has equal, even numbers of protons and neutrons, the model strongly predicts it should have a rigid, perfectly spherical shape.
Because it's perfectly symmetrical.
Right, the internal forces are assumed to be balanced. But in 2025, a massive experimental paper was published in Nature Communications.
Okay, what did they find?
Researchers had finally managed to properly measure the shape of molybdenum-84, and the data shocked the physics community. It wasn't spherical at all.
Spherical.
It showed maximum deformation. It was highly elongated, shaped more like a rugby ball or a football.
That's a total crisis for the standard model. Millions of dollars in research assumed it would be a sphere.
A catastrophic failure of the standard model's prediction. But here is the triumph of Ducas's work. TDUFT mathematically predicted this deformation before the 2025 data was ever published.
Wait, how? How did a theory based on platonic solids and the golden ratio see a rugby ball-shaped atom coming when the standard model was totally blind to it?
By calculating the proton and neutron phi shells as separate but interacting lattices, standard models often lump the forces together.
Oh, I see.
But when you run the numbers for 42 protons and 42 neutrons through the phi recursion formula, TDUFT places Mo84 at an identical mid-shell peak.
Mid-shell, meaning it's physically halfway between the stable, spherical closed shells we talked about earlier.
Exactly halfway. And at that exact mid-shell position, the mathematical interference between the phi expansion track and the psi contraction track is at its absolute maximum.
They're pulling against each other at peak tension.
Exactly. TDUFT calculated this interference and perfectly predicted the collective 8-proton and 8-neutron excitation that causes that massive physical deformation.
Wow.
The standard model assumed rigidity because it just looked at the even numbers. TDUFT predicted maximum flexibility because it understood the underlying geometric tension.
The source also mentions it predicted the shape of lead-208, correct?
Yes, it did.
Good.
Standard physics considers lead-208 a doubly magic nucleus because it has 82 protons and 126 neutrons, both magic numbers.
So they assume it's a perfect sphere.
Standard models insist it must be perfectly spherical. But TDUFT correctly predicted its moderate prolate or slightly elongated shape. The geometry got it right exactly where the empirical parameters failed.
If a theoretical physicist can predict a physical anomaly before an accelerator discovers it, that forces the community to pay attention.
It certainly should.
But the text doesn't stop at theoretical physics. The author boldly outlines actual practical engineering applications derived from this math.
This is where the theory moves from understanding the universe to manipulating it. The source material describes the conceptual design for a zero-point motor.
A zero-point motor. That sounds dangerously close to science fiction. It sounds like the holy grail of free energy.
The author is highly specific about the mechanical requirements. The motor is designed to operate at a precise 5.6 megahertz frequency.
Why that specific frequency?
Because 5.6 megahertz perfectly matches the phi harmonics of the tetrahedral base of the geometric lattice.
Okay, so matching the frequency of the lattice.
Right. The claim is that by mechanically replicating the atomic facial pumping, basically inducing the same geometric torsion that exists naturally at the atomic level, the motor can actively extract vacuum energy from the D lattice.
Vacuum energy, pulling power out of what we perceive as empty space.
Yeah.
And it claims an efficiency greater than 1, meaning the motor would output more usable physical energy than you have to put in to start the motor.
Yes. It theoretically bootstraps energy from the infinite structural potential of those empty outer phi shells we discussed.
This is the part where traditional physicists listening will be tearing their hair out.
I can imagine.
An efficiency greater than 1 breaks the fundamental laws of thermodynamics. You can't create energy from nothing.
It's vital to clarify that within the TDUFT framework, this process does not violate thermodynamics and merely redefines the boundaries of the closed system.
Redefines the boundaries, huh?
You aren't creating energy from nothing. You are extracting it from the infinite pre-existing geometric potential of the D lattice. Standard thermodynamics assumes the vacuum is dead space. TDUFT assumes the vacuum is a highly energetic geometric battery that we simply currently lack the geometric key to unlock.
And the author doesn't just theorize this. He demands to be tested. He lists specific falsifiable experiments. He says essentially, don't just take my math for it. Build this and prove me right or wrong.
The hallmark of good science is falsifiability. One test he proposes involves measuring the resonant lifetimes of helium-4 versus oxygen-16.
And what would that prove?
The theory predicts that the exact ratio of those lifetimes should perfectly equal phi to the fourth power, which is 6.854.
That is extremely specific.
Another highly specific test involves placing a ring of niobium under phi lattice excitation,
Why niobium?
because it's a well-understood superconductor.
And what would exciting this niobium ring actually do?
The math predicts it should produce a 10 to the negative 8 gram periodic weight fluctuation.
Wait, weight fluctuation? You're talking about anti-gravity.
Yes. If mass is simply a geometric expression on a dimensional lattice, then by mechanically manipulating that lattice at the correct resonant frequency, you theoretically modulate the object's gravitational coupling to space.
But 10 to the negative 8 grams is microscopic.
It is, but it is entirely measurable with modern portion balances. If an experimental physicist runs this test and observes that exact periodic fluctuation, TDUFT ceases to be a radical theory and becomes observed physics.
I need to take a breath, because we have covered the atomic nucleus, the illusion of quantum probability, the end of the Big Bang, and zero-point anti-gravity motors.
It's a lot of ground.
But the deep dive takes one final massive turn into something even more foundational: the metamathematical and philosophical implications of the text. We're looking at the numbers that seed the universe.
This explores domain 2 of the text. This steps back from the physics to examine the pure mathematical properties of the fundamental constants driving the theory: phi, AI, and pi squared.
What happens when you look deeply at the digits of these numbers? Because the golden ratio is an irrational number. The decimals are supposed to just go on forever, randomly, without any repeating pattern.
In standard mathematics, they do appear entirely random. But the author claims that when you perform a specific harmonic analysis on the first 1,000 decimal digits of phi, Ci, and pi squared, they stabilize perfectly into what he calls digit harmonics.
What does a digit harmonic look like?
It means that if you count the occurrences of each individual digit from 0 to 9 within those 1,000 decimal places, every single digit occurs exactly 100 times.
Wait, really? So 0 appears exactly 100 times, 1 appears exactly 100 times, 7 appears exactly 100 times.
Yes.
A perfectly uniform distribution across a supposedly random, irrational number.
Yes, and because psi is mathematically just 5 minus 1, they share this identical harmonic structure. It is a stunning display of internal numerical symmetry.
That feels incredibly structurally non-random. It feels designed.
Right.
But what about pi? Just raw pi, 3.14159, and so on.
That is where the mathematical contrast becomes philosophically crucial. Raw pi does not possess this symmetry.
It doesn't.
No, raw pi is chaotic. The digit distribution fluctuates wildly without stabilizing into this 100 per digit modular harmony. But when you square pi...
When you multiply pi by itself, pi squared, it suddenly snaps into this perfect harmony.
According to the mathematical analysis presented in the text, yes. By squaring it, pi squared joins phi and psi in perfect, uniform geometric order.
Wow.
And this mathematical observation forms the entire basis for the author's highly provocative theological cosmology.
We should be clear to everyone listening right now. We are not endorsing a specific religion or creed, but we are reporting impartially on the philosophical framework the author builds directly from this math.
Right.
It's a fascinating mapping of numbers to theology. How does he construct this cosmology?
He breaks the mathematical process of creation down into 3 distinct sequential layers.
Okay, let's go through them.
Layer 1 is the transcendent seed. This is represented mathematically by raw pi. It is infinite potential pre-creation chaos.
Pre-creation chaos.
The digits 0 through 9 exist within it, but they are unformed, lacking uniform harmony. The author metaphorically associates these digits with the spirits of God, a pre-material ordering principle hovering over a void of pure potential.
So raw pi is the void before creation begins.
Yes. Then comes layer 2, the squaring. Pi becomes pi squared.
Okay, the squaring.
By squaring the transcendent number, the math forces it into a harmonic algebraic constant. The digits lock into their perfect 100 per digit harmony.
Which means what, philosophically?
The author equates this specific mathematical operation to the generative act of creation. It is the numerical equivalent of the command, "let there be light." Chaos is instantly forced into structural order.
And layer 3.
Layer 3 is creation extraction. The value of pi squared is approximately 9.87. The author mathematically subtracts exactly 1 from pi squared.
Why subtract 1? What's the 1 represent?
The 1 represents the entirety of the material universe.
Oh, wow.
That 1 is extracted to build our physical reality using the additive and multiplicative ladders of phi and psi that we discussed earlier. Remember, where phi plus psi equals 1.
I remember.
The extraction of that 1 carries the entropy required to manifest physical mass.
But if pi squared is 9.87, and you subtract 1 for the physical universe, you are left with a massive remainder.
You are.
Pi squared minus 1 is about 8.87. What happens to the rest of the math?
That remainder, pi squared minus 1, mathematically factors into pi plus 1 multiplied by pi minus 1.
Okay, and what does the author do with that?
The author argues that this vast mathematical remainder forms a conjugate infinite spirit realm.
A spirit realm.
It is an unobservable domain patterned with the exact same geometric proportions as our material world, but vastly larger, and lacking the entropy of the extracted one.
The author explicitly connects this mathematical deduction to a Bible verse, Romans 1.20, the idea that the invisible qualities of creation are clearly seen in what has been made.
He does.
It is a breathtaking, audacious attempt to unify pure theology with quantum math. He is literally arguing that the digit distribution of these irrational numbers is the verifiable signature of a creator.
Regardless of one's personal metaphysical beliefs, it is an undeniable mathematical reality that these specific quadratic roots, phi and psi, are the only numbers that mathematically satisfy the geometries required to close these topological loops.
Right.
If the physical universe is truly built on this 3D geometry, it had to be built exactly this way. From a purely structural standpoint, there was no other option available to nature.
Let's pull all of this together. We have journeyed from a shockingly simple quadratic equation.
Yeah.
X squared minus x minus 1 equals 0.
You're simple.
We watched that equation build the impenetrable stability of the atomic nucleus through competing fractions of velocity and entropy. We explored how a structural zero acts as a cosmic shock absorber to force perfect whole numbers.
A lot of paradigm shifts.
We redefined the electron from a random cloud of probability into a precise dimensional twist. We replaced the chaotic explosion of the Big Bang with the elegant filling of an infinite geometric stadium.
Yes.
We saw how this math predicted the shape of molybdenum-84 before the world's best standard models could. And we traced the squaring of pi to a mathematical theory of a spirit realm.
It is a vastly ambitious, highly unified framework. It doesn't just try to describe what the universe does. It attempts to answer the fundamental why of its existence.
So what does this all mean for you, listening to this deep dive? If TDUFT is right, the universe isn't a random lottery of fitted parameters.
No, it's not.
It isn't a cosmic accident held together by duct tape and empirical fudge factors. It means there is only one universe geometrically possible.
One inevitable outcome.
Every atom of oxygen in your lungs, every piece of calcium in your bones had to be exactly the way it is because it follows one inevitable, unbreakable mathematical equation. You are not a random fluctuation of probability. You are a geometric necessity.
And that necessity extends infinitely inward into the atom and infinitely outward to the edge of the cosmos. It is a reality built on pure, unyielding structure.
I want to leave you with one final, provocative concept to mull over, something that builds directly on the implications of this text.
Let's hear it.
If the entire universe is just a geometric recursion, a pattern that becomes progressively more complex as these free shells fill up, moving from simple nuclei to complex atoms to molecules to biological cells to the billions of neurons in your brain, then what is consciousness? Perhaps human consciousness isn't some mystical ghost in the machine, and perhaps it isn't a byproduct separate from physics.
It's a very interesting thought.
Perhaps human consciousness is simply what this geometric mathematical recursion looks like from the inside. It is the geometry experiencing its own structure, waking up to measure itself once the math reaches a critical level of complexity. Something to think about the next time you look up at the stars. Until next time, keep diving deep.